It doesn't surprise me at all when a client tells me their avoidant partner is back and the relationship is okay again. Of course they came back, but you shouldn't get that excited because I can guarantee you they're not back because they've suddenly realized your worth or because they've magically developed the capacity for healthy intimacy. Avoidance almost always comes back because they're trapped in a psychological prison of their own making, driven by unhealed traumas that leave them no choice but to repeat the same destructive patterns over and over again. Understanding why avoidance always returns isn't about giving you false hope or encouraging you to wait around for someone who can't love you properly. It's about helping you see that their behavior has nothing to do with your worth and everything to do with their inability to break free from trauma responses that were programmed into them long before you existed. This understanding is crucial because it helps you make informed decisions about how much of yourself you're willing to invest in someone who may never be able to reciprocate in the way you deserve. It helps you see that love isn't always enough to heal someone and that your patience and understanding, while beautiful, cannot substitute for their willingness to do their own healing work. The trauma prison that controls them. Avoidants don't choose to be avoidant any more than someone chooses to have anxiety or depression. Their attachment style is the result of early experiences that taught them love is dangerous, vulnerability leads to pain, and depending on others results in disappointment or abandonment. These lessons get encoded so deeply into their nervous system that they become automatic responses, not conscious choices. When an avoidant pushes you away, they're not making a rational decision about your relationship. They're responding to ancient programming that interprets closeness as a threat to their survival. When they come back, they're not making a conscious choice to pursue love. They're being pulled by equally powerful programming that fears true abandonment more than temporary distance. This creates a psychological prison where they can neither fully embrace love nor completely reject it. They're trapped between their need for connection, which is biologically hardwired into all humans, and their terror of vulnerability, which was conditioned into them through early trauma. This internal conflict doesn't resolve itself through willpower or good intentions. It requires deliberate, often professional intervention to heal. The tragedy is that most avoidants don't even realize they're trapped in this prison. They experience their push-pull behavior as just how they are or what feels natural, without understanding that these responses are trauma symptoms, not personality traits. They might even pride themselves on their independence and emotional control, not recognizing that these are actually coping mechanisms that prevent them from experiencing the deep connection they secretly crave. The push-pull game they can't stop playing. The push-pull dynamic that avoidants create isn't a conscious strategy or manipulation. It's a compulsive trauma response that they feel powerless to control. When they get close to you, their nervous system floods with anxiety signals that scream danger, even though nothing dangerous is actually happening. When they create distance, they experience temporary relief, followed by emptiness and regret. This cycle repeats itself automatically because the underlying trauma hasn't been healed. They can't stop pushing you away when triggered any more than someone with PTSD can stop having flashbacks. They can't prevent themselves from coming back any more than someone with anxiety can simply choose not to worry. These are nervous system responses that operate below the level of conscious choice. Understanding this helps explain why logical conversations about the relationship don't create lasting change. You can talk about the push-pull pattern, you can express how it hurts you, you can even help them see their own behavior clearly, but until the underlying trauma is addressed, their nervous system will continue to hijack their rational mind whenever intimacy triggers their survival responses. The most heartbreaking aspect of this cycle is that both the pushing and the pulling are expressions of their trauma, not their authentic desires. When they push you away, they're protecting themselves from imagined threats. When they pull you back, they're trying to fill the void created by their own defensive behaviors. Neither response represents their true feelings or their genuine capacity for love. Why they always return. Avoidants return not because they've learned to love better, but because the same trauma that makes them push you away also makes it impossible for them to truly let you go. Their early experiences taught them that love is dangerous, but they also taught them that being completely alone is unbearable. This creates a no-win situation where they can neither fully commit nor completely detach. When they leave or create distance, they're initially flooded with relief. The anxiety of potential engulfment disappears, and they feel like they can breathe again. But this relief is temporary because underneath their fear of intimacy lies an even deeper fear of abandonment. As the initial relief fades, they start to feel the emptiness and loneliness that their emotional walls create. This isn't just missing you in a normal, healthy way. This is a trauma response to isolation that feels threatening to their survival. Their nervous system, which pushed you away to avoid the perceived danger of intimacy, now starts sending signals that being completely alone is also dangerous. This triggers their return, not from a place of healthy desire for connection, but from a trauma-driven need to avoid the terror of true abandonment. The cruel irony is that they return to you because you represent safety to them, but they can't actually accept that safety because their system is still programmed to interpret closeness as danger. So they come back seeking the comfort and security you provide, but they can't fully receive it without triggering their original trauma responses all over again. The repetition compulsion. What you're witnessing when an avoidant repeatedly returns only to create distance again is called repetition compulsion, a psychological phenomenon where people unconsciously recreate traumatic scenarios in an attempt to master them. The avoidant is essentially trying to rewrite their original trauma story, hoping that this time they can experience love without getting hurt. But because the underlying trauma remains unhealed, they keep recreating the same dynamics that caused their wounds in the first place. They unconsciously choose partners who will trigger their attachment fears, then act out the same patterns of approach and avoidance that characterize their early relationships. Each cycle confirms their unconscious belief that love is dangerous and people always leave, which reinforces their need to protect themselves through emotional distance. This repetition compulsion explains why avoidants often have similar relationship patterns across multiple partnerships. It's not that they keep choosing the wrong people or that their partners keep failing them. It's that they're unconsciously recreating the same psychological drama in an attempt to heal wounds that can't be healed through repetition alone. The only way to break this cycle is through conscious awareness of the pattern and deliberate work to heal the underlying trauma. Without this awareness and commitment to healing, they will continue to repeat these patterns regardless of how much they claim to want something different or how much they genuinely care about their partners. The healing that must come from within. The most important thing to understand about loving an avoidant is that you cannot heal their trauma for them. No amount of patience, understanding, consistency, or unconditional love on your part can undo the damage that was done to them in their formative years. Only they can choose to face their wounds and do the difficult work of healing them. This healing typically requires professional help, because trauma responses are deeply embedded in the nervous system and resistant to change through willpower alone. It requires them to develop awareness of their patterns, understand the origins of their attachment fears, and learn new ways of responding to intimacy triggers. Most importantly, it requires them to admit that their current coping strategies, while protective, are also preventing them from experiencing the love and connection they truly want. The challenge is that many avoidants resist this healing work because it requires the very vulnerability they've spent their lives avoiding. To heal attachment trauma, they must be willing to feel the original pain that created their defensive patterns. They must be willing to acknowledge that their independence and emotional control are actually symptoms of wounds rather than strengths to be celebrated. Without this willingness to face their trauma and engage in healing work, They remain trapped in cycles that will continue to damage their relationships and prevent them from experiencing genuine intimacy. Their returns to you aren't signs of progress. They're just another rotation of the same wheel they've been spinning their entire lives. Your role and your limits. If you're in love with an avoidant, your role is not to be their therapist, their healer, or their savior. Your role is to be a loving partner who can support their healing journey if they choose to take it, while also protecting your own emotional well-being and maintaining your own standards for what constitutes a healthy relationship. You can offer understanding and patience, but you cannot offer these things indefinitely without receiving growth and effort in return. You can provide a safe space for their healing, but you cannot force them to use that space. You can love them unconditionally as a person while still having conditions for what you'll accept in a relationship. The most loving thing you can do for an avoidant and for yourself is to be clear about what you need in a relationship and to maintain boundaries around those needs. This means not accepting repeated cycles of closeness and distance without seeing genuine effort toward change. It means requiring them to acknowledge their patterns and take responsibility for healing their trauma. Supporting an avoidance healing doesn't mean enabling their avoidance. It doesn't mean accepting poor treatment because you understand its origins. It doesn't mean sacrificing your own needs because you have compassion for their wounds. True support involves holding them accountable for their behavior while offering encouragement for their growth. The necessity of self-protection. While you can have compassion for an avoidance trauma and understanding for their behavioral patterns, you must prioritize protecting your own peace and emotional well-being. Loving someone with unhealed trauma can be emotionally exhausting, psychologically damaging, and spiritually depleting if you don't maintain strong boundaries around what you'll accept. You cannot love someone into healing if they're not willing to heal themselves. You cannot patient someone into emotional availability if they're not committed to developing it. You cannot understand someone into changing if they're not willing to acknowledge that change is necessary. Protecting your peace means recognizing when your love and support are being taken for granted rather than appreciated and reciprocated with genuine effort toward growth. It means acknowledging when you're giving more than you're receiving and when the relationship is depleting rather than nourishing you. Self-protection also means maintaining your own emotional regulation and not allowing their trauma responses to trigger your own insecurities or anxiety. You cannot be a stabilizing force for someone else if you're not stable yourself. You cannot offer healthy love if you're compromising your own emotional health in the process. The difficult decision point. Every person who loves an avoidant eventually reaches a decision point where they must choose between continuing to hope for change that may never come or accepting that the avoidant's current capacity is not enough for a healthy relationship. This decision becomes necessary when it becomes clear that the avoidant is not willing to acknowledge their patterns or commit to healing their trauma. This decision point is agonizing because it often involves walking away from someone you genuinely love. Someone whose pain you understand, someone whose potential you can see clearly. It requires accepting that love alone isn't enough to create a healthy relationship and that your understanding of their trauma doesn't obligate you to accept treatment that hurts you. The decision becomes easier when you recognize that enabling someone's avoidance by accepting it indefinitely isn't actually loving, it's preventing them from experiencing the natural consequences of their behavior that might motivate them to seek help. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is remove yourself from the cycle so they can feel the full impact of what their trauma responses cost them. Walking away doesn't mean you don't love them. It means you love yourself enough to require reciprocal effort in your relationships. It means you recognize that your peace and emotional well-being matter just as much as their comfort and healing. The validation they need to heal. For an avoidant to break their pattern of returning only to leave again, they need to develop genuine awareness of their trauma responses and take responsibility for healing them. This requires them to admit that their behavior patterns are hurting both themselves and the people they care about. It requires them to acknowledge that their current coping strategies, while understandable, are not sustainable for healthy relationships. Most importantly, it requires them to validate their own wounds instead of minimizing them or explaining them away. Many avoidants resist healing because they've learned to see their trauma responses as strengths rather than symptoms. They pride themselves on their independence and emotional control without recognizing these as adaptive responses to early pain. Healing begins when they can say, I have trauma that affects my ability to be in healthy relationships, and I'm willing to get help to change that. It progresses when they can acknowledge specific behaviors, the pushing away, the emotional withdrawal, the fear of commitment, as trauma symptoms rather than personality traits. Without this level of self-awareness and commitment to change, their returns will continue to be followed by departures, creating endless cycles that exhaust everyone involved and prevent genuine growth or healing. The choice that's yours to make. Understanding why avoidants always come back gives you the information you need to make informed decisions about your relationship. You can choose to stay and support their healing journey if they're genuinely committed to it. You can choose to leave if they're not willing to acknowledge their patterns or do the work necessary for change. What you cannot choose is to love them into healing, to patience them into emotional availability, or to understanding them into changing. These transformations must come from their own recognition of their patterns and their own commitment to growth. Your understanding of their trauma can help you have compassion for their struggles without accepting treatment that compromises your own well-being. Your love for them can motivate you to support their healing without sacrificing your own emotional health. Your hope for their growth can inspire patience without enabling avoidance. The avoidant will likely come back because their trauma leaves them no choice but to repeat their patterns until they heal them. But you do have a choice about whether you'll be there when they return, and that choice should be based on whether they're showing genuine commitment to breaking the cycles that brought them back to your door once again. The most loving thing you can do for both of you is to require that their returns be accompanied by real effort toward healing, not just promises of change or explanations of their behavior. Love without growth is just repetition, and repetition without healing is just another form of suffering that serves no one's highest good.